Before the world trusted paper, it trusted metal, weight, sound, and the promise of gold. But long before banks and skyscrapers, before markets breathed in numbers, there was only belief. The belief that value could live in a coin, that worth could be carried in hand. And on one small island, surrounded by fog and faith, that belief was forged into empire. Britain's story was not born from conquest alone. It began in the quiet trade of trust. In taverns and marketplaces, merchants swapped silver for goods, not knowing they were shaping the world's pulse. Each coin, stamped with a monarch's face, carried more than value. It carried reputation and command. The pound sterling became not just currency, but identity, a promise backed by pride and empire. In the beginning, sterling meant purity, silver so fine it rang like certainty when struck. It was the sound of reliability, the weight of a nation learning to monetize faith itself. Coins were melted, remade, reissued, but their symbol endured, more trusted than the crown that blessed them. Because while kings fell and wars changed borders, the pound stayed, silent, steady, sovereign. By the 17th century, gold replaced silver as the language of civilization's higher conversation. Britain, now ambitious and restless, realized control of money meant control of mankind's imagination. From the coffee houses of London rose a new empire, not of armies, but of accounts. Merchants became monarchs, and a new temple of power took shape beside the Thames. That temple was the Bank of England, founded in 1694, born of crisis, faith, and necessity. The crown was drowning in debt from endless war, and paper was cheaper than loyalty. So the bank lent gold it didn't yet have, and the king borrowed time itself. It was a transaction so daring, it changed the nature of value forever. The bank became the state's heartbeat, printing confidence as fast as soldiers spent blood. Paper notes replaced metal not through force, but through belief stronger than iron or empire. Every note said, "I promise to pay," a whisper of assurance that conquered imagination. Britain had discovered the alchemy of credit, turning promises into prosperity, illusion into industry. The pound now represented more than wealth. It represented the future, printed and promised in ink. A farmer's savings, a merchant's dream, a nation's survival, all bound within those fragile fibers. Gold remained the foundation, but paper gave it wings, and those wings carried the world. Britain had learned how to sell faith itself, and the world was eager to buy. London's streets filled with traders, clerks, and bankers, new architects of invisible empires. The docks of the Thames swelled with ships trading not just goods, but destiny and debt. Each voyage carried the pound's shadow across oceans, where it colonized hearts before it conquered land. The world began to measure its value not in kings, but in sterling. The Industrial Revolution struck like lightning, and Britain was the first to bottle its thunder. Coal, steam, and credit combined to rewrite civilization's rhythm in a new language of production. Factories roared, rails stretched, and the pound became both the fuel and reward of progress. For every ton of steel, for every barrel of coal, a ledger line was written. The British Empire expanded, not just through flags and fleets, but through the spread of accounting. Wherever Britain traded, the pound followed, loyal, familiar, as inevitable as sunrise. India's rupees, Australia's shillings, Canada's notes, all tied to London's silent authority. The empire's invisible hand was not its navy, but its currency. Money, once local and tangible, had become abstract and global, tethered to the island's heartbeat. The Bank of England was no longer just an institution. It was a god of equilibrium. Its chambers decided not only interest rates, but the tempo of the entire civilized world. And as long as the pound stayed strong, the empire could afford its dreams. But strength demands sacrifice, and empire demands illusion to disguise its hunger. Behind every investment was conquest, behind every profit, exploitation disguised as progress. The colonies bled resources, while their rulers counted profits printed on crisp white promises. The pound grew fat on the sweat of millions who would never see it shine. Yet belief is stronger than guilt, and Britain's faith in the pound was near divine. Gold from Africa, tea from India, cotton from the Americas, all transmuted into sterling supremacy. It was the currency of contracts, of war loans, of gentlemen and governments alike. Even rebellion was financed through British banks, for revolution itself needed London's approval to begin. By the dawn of the 19th century, the pound was more than national. It was elemental. It flowed like wind and water, an unseen empire connecting ports, banks, and borders. Wars were won not by armies, but by whoever held the stronger balance sheet. And Britain held not just gold, but the world's trust, the rarest metal of all. Then came the gold standard, a system so precise, it turned faith into formula. Each pound, defined by weight and purity, became the measure of civilization itself. Britain declared that money must be as stable as its monarchy, as permanent as its pride. And the world agreed, because Britain's voice, like its currency, carried gravity. To trade was to convert was to bow, not to kings, but to sterling. The colonies traded in British measure, the banks in British time, the markets in British tone. London's financial district became the centre of an invisible web binding continents together. Every interest rate, every transaction, every nation orbited its quiet, calculating sun. From Liverpool to Calcutta, from Cape Town to Hong Kong, the pound reigned unseen. Its value was not shouted. It was whispered in contracts, printed in ledgers, sealed in habit. Even America, fierce and independent, could not escape the gravitational pull of London's coin. For while revolutions broke chains, commerce forged new ones far more elegant and eternal. Gold moved through vaults like blood through veins, and the pound pumped it with mechanical grace. Each ingot a heartbeat, each promise a pulse, empire alive in arithmetic precision. The world trusted Britain not because it was kind, but because it was calculable. And in finance, reliability is the highest form of worship. By mid-century, London was not just a city. It was the world's accounting book. Ships brought goods, cables brought numbers, and every figure found its way to the bank, from war to trade to exploration. Nothing moved without a ledger's blessing. The pound had achieved what empires always dream of: rule without presence, obedience without force. But beneath that glory, the cost began to whisper. Every empire built on certainty eventually fears uncertainty more than failure. Every system built on belief trembles when belief begins to fade, and every coin, however polished, gathers tarnish in the hands of time. As the century turned, cracks began to form behind the marble and mirrors of success. Competition stirred in America. Ambition rose in Germany. Revolution brewed in debt-strained colonies. The pound, still radiant, began to bear the invisible weight of its own perfection. Because power, like currency, is only stable when no one questions its worth. And soon, the world would question everything. The next century would test the limits of value, belief, and the endurance of empire. For every empire that rises on confidence must one day face the arithmetic of collapse. And Britain's pound, mighty, golden, eternal, was about to learn that time bankrupts all kings. The 20th century arrived like a storm disguised as sunrise, gilded in gold and arrogance. London glowed brighter than any capital, its banks breathing the same rhythm as its empire. Every ship that sailed bore not just goods, but the invisible authority of its currency. The pound sterling had become more than metal or paper. It was civilization's chosen language. In counting houses and clubs, men toasted profit as if it were prophecy fulfilled. They believed wealth eternal, progress inevitable, the market divine, the world permanently indebted to Britain. Gold glittered beneath vaults, like sunlight trapped in stone, unspent, worshipped, unquestioned, untouchable. The empire did not merely rule, It priced, it loaned, it insured the future itself. The gold standard made faith a formula, a promise weighed and tested by mathematics. Every note in every hand was a contract with precision, not politics or prayer. London became the temple where numbers knelt and nations confessed their need for stability. And the pound became Britain's halo, bright, blinding, and increasingly heavy to wear. From the cotton mills of Manchester to the tea auctions of Calcutta, trade obeyed its measure. Every colony sent its labour, its harvest, its faith back to the island's ledgers. The empire's ships carried wealth one way and promises the other, balanced perfectly on confidence. For centuries, gold had been God, but now Britain played priest and prophet both. Wars came and went, yet the pound endured, polished by recovery, protected by routine. Even crisis seemed orderly, even panic queued politely before entering the bank's grand doors. No empire had ever controlled imagination so completely or made belief so profitable. To possess sterling was to belong to the modern world, clean, stable, self-assured, divine. But progress always hides its fatigue behind elegance and its fear behind tradition's mask. America's factories hummed louder. Germany's steel outshone Britain's fading brass of confidence. Other nations learned the arithmetic of ambition, and London felt its supremacy thinning. The world that once borrowed Britain's certainty began manufacturing its own versions of belief. Then thunder broke over Europe, and gold fled the vaults faster than troops to trenches. The Great War devoured everything, men, machines, and the illusion that order could never break. Britain printed promises faster than blood dried on the fields of France and Flanders. Victory came at last, but the pound's reflection in gold had turned pale and unsure. Peace brought no comfort, only balance sheets screaming louder than cannon ever did. Debt stretched across oceans, interest replaced empire, and London's banks trembled beneath quiet despair. The nation clung to discipline, returning to gold like a priest to a crumbling altar. But faith once broken returns brittle, and the world no longer bowed as it once had. Across the Atlantic, a new rhythm rose, the bold, brash voice of the dollar. America had no empire of land, but an empire of credit eager to expand. Its bankers sold dreams where Britain sold rules. Its markets glittered where London grew grey. The future had changed accent, and the pound began to sound politely outdated. Still Britain refused surrender. Habit is the last refuge of fading gods. It balanced budgets, while others borrowed, preached austerity, while others embraced ambition. Factories closed, unemployment grew, yet ministers toasted stability as virtue rather than failure. For a nation raised on order, even collapse had to look impeccably disciplined. The Second World War delivered the final test, the empire's ledger against history's reckoning. Once again, the island mortgaged its survival, trading sovereignty for American aid and time. When the smoke cleared, London stood intact, but hollow, its power written in foreign ink. Sterling had financed victory, but victory had bankrupted sterling in spirit and supply alike. At Bretton Woods, the world rewrote its commandments, and Britain signed them with trembling grace. The dollar now wore the crown the pound had forged, and gold knelt in Washington. London remained respected, but no longer obeyed. Its authority ceremonial, its reach sentimental. The banker of empires had become the broker of memories, elegant yet dependent, proud yet tired. Yet London adapted. It always did, slipping gracefully from empire to enterprise. Its traders replaced soldiers, its skyscrapers replaced ships, its ambition traded gunpowder for data. The city learned invisibility again, weaving influence through contracts, derivatives, and offshore havens. Power no longer needed colonies when it could rent entire continents through finance. By the century's end, the pound endured not as ruler, but as veteran survivor. It whispered through markets, quieter now, but still fluent in the language it invented. Other currencies came and went, but none escaped the grammar Britain had written first. The world still measured value in its image, disciplined, decimal, deceptively calm. The island that once lent the world its confidence now borrowed its own from memory. But memory, like gold, is finite. It gleams brightest before vanishing into myth. The pound's story was never merely economic. It was human faith refined into pattern. And even diminished, it remains the prototype of every promise we still believe. Because money, at its core, is only trust wearing the crown of arithmetic, and the pound taught the world how to worship that crown with devotion and doubt. Empires fall, currencies fade, but the desire to measure worth will never retire. Britain's gift, and its curse is that it made belief itself a transaction. The empire that once counted every coin began to count its own decline instead. The world it built through credit and confidence now turned to other centers of calculation. New York breathed louder, Tokyo blinked faster, Frankfurt whispered more efficiently than London ever could. The city that priced the planet now priced its own nostalgia in polished marble offices. The mid-century brought an illusion of recovery, brief, bright, brittle, and quietly borrowed. The pound still bore the Queen's face, but its authority had grown ceremonial, almost quaint. The sterling zones that once mapped the empire's reach now resembled gravestones of economic memory. What had been empire now survived as paperwork, alliances, and the soft tyranny of habit. In 1967, the truth could hide no longer. Devaluation arrived like an uninvited guest. Harold Wilson's voice, calm yet weary, told Britain it was the pound in your pocket changing. But everyone knew what it meant. Confidence had collapsed, and prestige was being sold by weight. The nation that invented value now felt its own measured, discounted, and quietly diminished. In the decades that followed, the pound became a mirror reflecting the island's shifting identity. Some still saw empire, others saw exhaustion. Most saw a symbol they no longer understood. The numbers changed, but the rhythm remained: faith, collapse, reform, recovery, repetition. Britain had built the world's first financial religion, and now it was learning apostasy. Yet London refused to fade. Ghosts of ambition rarely vanish. They reinvent themselves as echoes. When industry crumbled, finance rose. When coal dimmed, the city discovered the light of digits. The 1980s crowned a new empire, not of soldiers or miners, but of markets. The Thatcher years turned deregulation into doctrine, and once again London ruled the invisible world. This time, the colonies were offshore, the Caymans, Jersey, and quiet rooms with no clocks. Sterling's power had mutated, now built not on gold, but on complexity and confidence games. The city learned to disguise risk as innovation, to wrap danger in spreadsheets and smiles. The old empire took ships, the new one took screens, faster, cleaner, equally merciless. By the dawn of the digital age, Britain had become the world's subtle accountant again. Money no longer needed metal, paper, or even nation. It lived in code and cables. But the pound survived, digital and defiant, still whispering its centuries-old creed of stability. Even Bitcoin, that rebel currency, borrowed the same ancient dream, trust built on mathematics and faith. The irony was complete. The pound had created the system that no longer needed it. Its descendants ruled the markets, dollars, euros, yen, all speaking the grammar it first wrote. And though sterling's reign had faded, its shadow still guided the geometry of global wealth. Because what Britain once owned physically, it still owned philosophically, the blueprint of belief itself. The 2008 crash arrived like a ghost returning to claim unpaid spiritual debt. The city, once immortal, discovered that confidence could still vanish in a single sleepless weekend. Traders spoke of liquidity, governments of austerity, but beneath the jargon was something older: fear. Fear that the machine Britain built had outgrown its maker and forgotten its original prayer. For centuries, the pound had been promise incarnate, that value could be eternal if measured precisely. But precision without compassion corrodes, and the cracks spread not through banks but through hearts. People began to doubt not money, but meaning, what any of it had ever bought. Austerity turned progress into memory, and nostalgia into the island's last remaining export. Still, the currency endured, thin, fragile, symbolic, more idea than instrument, more ghost than gold. It had survived wars, revolutions, defaults, and doubts, because belief dies slower than any institution. Every note still whispered its ancient words, "I promise to pay," with delicate defiance and irony. But everyone who read them knew, payment was now a story, not a certainty. As the 21st century deepened, Britain found itself both architect and antique of its own invention. The world had gone digital, borderless, algorithmic, yet its DNA still shimmered with sterling's imprint. Global banking, stock trading, cryptocurrencies, all distant relatives of that first London ledger. The empire had dissolved, but its arithmetic still ruled the rhythms of global civilization, and in that quiet triumph hides the tragedy. Britain taught the world how to believe in value, but in doing so, it forgot how to believe in itself without valuation. The pound became not a tool, but a mirror, reflecting the island's pride and fragility. Once it weighed gold, now it weighs identity, relevance, and the cost of nostalgia. Still, every market sunrise begins in the same Greenwich rhythm Britain once declared divine. Traders in New York, Singapore, and Dubai set their clocks to London's patient heartbeats. The world no longer kneels before sterling, but it still listens to its measured pulse. The crown may have cracked, but the scepter of timing still rests on British time. Even in decline, there is poetry, the kind only history can afford to finance. Empires collapse, but their systems persist, quietly humming beneath new flags and digital screens. The pound's story is not an ending, but a reminder. Belief never disappears, it reinvents. Every currency since has worn its ghost like a watermark, invisible but ever present. And so, the journey of sterling mirrors the journey of Britain itself, proud, flawed, eternal. A nation that conquered the tangible world and then built a new one from ideas. Its coins may tarnish, its notes may fade, but its myth remains perfectly balanced on history. For the world still trades in the language Britain taught, and that is its true immortality. The pound does not rule, it resonates, echoing through each transaction, each market, each algorithm. It lingers in the silence between numbers, in the trust behind every invisible exchange. Britain may have lost its empire, but it remains the author of the world's economy. Because no matter the currency, every deal still carries a faint trace of sterling's breath. If this story changed how you see wealth, time, and the illusion of permanence, remember, every empire leaves behind a ledger, and history never forgets the balance owed. Subscribe for more untold stories of how money, faith, and power built the modern world, because the next revolution won't begin with war, it will begin with belief losing value,